Hello YouTube and welcome to this video, and today we will be exploring in what I think are the top 5 factions for the Grand Campaign in Total War Rome 2. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. At the number 5 spot we have Carthage for the number 5 spot, and the reason why Carthage is on the number 5 spot is because, well, in the Grand Campaign, they aren't the best faction for an inexperienced player to choose from, because Carthage starts off with their lands divided. Their lands are divided, and they aren't. They're surrounded by
I will do you the honor
kind of
listening.
hostile
Our
neighbors, like
merchants
the
do not.
Iberian tribes. They're kind of
Do not
hostile
attempt
towards
to
you,
sweeten truth.
and your land is divided up into these client states that
Welcome, honor.
they don't really
An
like you, but then
excellent
they don't really
decision.
hate you at the same time. And then we got you always got Rome and Syracuse to worry about, and you start off at
I
war
have
with
little
the
gain in wasting the day on
Turdetani,
you. What you say had better
and
please my ears.
and they, but
Enter,
nevertheless,
friend, and speak.
despite their
The god
setbacks, Carthage is
You
still
are
a
welcome.
very powerful faction.
Your goods.
And once you
Well,
get going with them,
no.
they can become
We
like
see little
they can become
gain
really
in
good.
trade between our
And
peoples.
basically, what I would do if I was playing as Carthage, I would recruit as I would try to get any sort of like agreements with your client states, try to improve relations, but maybe keep an eye on, send your spy over and keep an eye on Syracuse to make sure they don't attack, because, and also try to increase the public order in your lands, and at the same time research military technology so you can get better troops, because Carthage, you can recruit really good troops such as Carthaginian hoplites, you can get Carthaginian cavalry, African pikes, Libyan infantry, and in the late game, and you have access to war elephants and sacred band. And war elephants are a pretty good unit. They are very good. And you have also huge access to mercenaries. You can get all kinds of mercenaries in the game. There's a lot of options to choose from, such as like Italian swords, and yeah, it's pretty much so. Carthage is, they're not, so like I said before, they're not the best faction in the Grand Campaign. They're nowhere near the best faction, but because their campaign is it's a little challenging for inexperienced players, but I think that they are still a very good faction once you get going with them, in my opinion, because they have access to really good troops. And without further ado, let's get over to number 4. And at the number 4 spot for best factions in the Grand Campaign, we have the Assini. And the reason why I chose the Assini are, like, they're the only one of the only decent barbarian factions in the Grand Campaign for beginners to play as. If you're a beginner to Total War Rome 2 and you want to play as one of the barbarian type factions, I definitely recommend the Iceni, because they start off in a really good position on the mainland. They're protected by the sea, and they're surrounded by a lot of weak factions. So you can focus on taking Britain before before going for the mainland, and you are pretty much kind of the main power in the area.
I welcome you.
So the Iceni,
There's a good
they can get
pork roasting.
decent barbarian. They can field barbarian type units. Although, I mean, their units are pretty much the same as like every other barbarian barbarian faction in the game, but the reason why the Assini are at number 4 is it's mainly because of their starting position. They have one of the better starting positions for a barbarian faction in the game, and their campaign is actually pretty easy.
Hail to the
It's
How can
not
I help?
it's a really easy campaign, and they can feud decent units, and they can pretty much turn into one of the main. You can become really powerful through playing as the Iceni.
Hail to the mother.
You can take Britain, then after that you can start going down and to the mainland of Gaul and start conquering some of the other weaker tribes there. So that's why the Assini are on number 4. At the number 3 spot on our top 5 Total War Rome 2 factions other than Rome, we have Macedon coming in at number 4.
Are you ready to serve?
And the reason why I chose Macedon at number 3, and the reason why Macedon is at number 3 is mainly because of both their starting position and the units that they can field in the game. Macedon is one of the successor kingdoms, which are, really powerful in the game. And Macedon starts off with a military ally, a client state, and an easy war against an easy faction, Tillus. And you're pretty much the main power in the region.
I look forward to
You can,
this
although
agreement
Sparta
is...
and Athens, they don't really like you because of past issues, but
Enter, friend, and speak.
they're very easy to deal with. Once Athens rebels against you,
I
they're
will
actually
do
not
you
that
the
hard to
honor
deal with.
of listening.
You just need to get your army ready for the invasion against
my
them.
master extends
And
in my
Macedon can feud a lot of heavy tier units. You can get, especially even in the early game, Agriarnian axemen, pikemen, Circe cavalry, citizen cavalry. You can get, and then later on you can feud thorax swords, thorax pikes, Thessalian cavalry. You can, and then you can have foot companions, which are one of the best pike units in the game. You can get Aspis companion cav, royal peltasts, and they can feud huge armies that are capable of combating pretty much everyone and every other faction in the game itself. And their position in Greece is pretty secure because because you can focus on the war against Tillus, because Athens and Sparta, they're already dealing with Epirus. So what I'd do if I was playing Macedon is I'd go after, well, depending on what you want to do, you could go after Epirus or Tillus and have Athens and Sparta help you. And speaking of Macedon, I do have a Macedon campaign that you guys should all check out if you haven't seen it yet. But that's the reason why Macedon is the number 3 spot in the list. And finally, at the number 2 spot of best campaign factions in Total War Rome 2, other than Rome, we have Egypt coming in at number 2. And Egypt, in my opinion, the number 2 and number 1 spot, in my opinion, it was really hard to choose, but the reason why I decided to put Egypt in number 2 because the number 1 faction, other than Rome in the game, I feel it does have one advantage over Egypt that Egypt doesn't. It was really close. What I'm saying. But Egypt's at number 2, and Egypt is an excellent faction to choose. So let me give you some of the reasons. So you start off in a really good position on the map. First of all, your only big enemy the only big enemy you're probably going to face in the game that's gonna that might give you a little bit of problems are the Seleucids to your north, but they aren't really a problem early game. And so you start off with a client state in Cyprus, which is good.
I throw open.
And
Excellent. We accept.
You do have some of the African nations to the south of you, although, and even though Kush doesn't really like you at the beginning, once if they declare war on you, they're not really that hard to deal with. They're just they can only recruit desert type units, which aren't that good combating against Egypt. And Egypt starts out at war with in Egypt similar with Cyrensia, which is kind of like a they're kind of they're similar to Egypt kind of, but except they're weaker. And Egypt, they have bonuses in their food. They own the rich Nile lands and all that, and they start off with a good food surplus, and they have good income, a good treasury. You start off with some of the somewhat decent units in the game, and in the late game you can get really good units. You can get Galatian swords, pikes, and the reason why, and Egypt has another thing. It has a lot of interesting units, like native Egyptian units mixed in with Hellenic units. I think that's really cool. You can get Galatian swords. You can get thorax swords. You can even recruit elephants, which I think is really beneficial. And you can also you can recruit Galatian Royal Guard. You can get Hellenic Royal Guard, Royal Peltas, Royal Thorax Swords, African War Elephants, Ptolemaic Cavalry, and Egypt fields one of the best. Egypt, in my opinion, has one of the best unit rosters in Total War Rome 2, and they have a really good starting position and a really good they own one of the best capital cities in the game itself, of Alexandria, which is a very rich capital city, and basically Egypt's also one of those factions that I'd really recommend to beginners. So that's the main reason why I'm choosing Egypt as the number 2 spot in the game. And now we're going to number 1. Finally, at the number 1 spot on our list of top 5 factions in Rome 2 that are in the Grand Campaign other than Rome, this is probably one of the hardest decisions that I've had to make regarding a top 5, because it was really hard choosing between Egypt and this faction. And I think that bird just flew in the water. Anyhow, so at the number 1 spot of top 5 Rome Total War 2 factions that are other than Rome, we have the Seleucid Empire at number 1. Now, if you don't have much experience with Rome 2, I wouldn't really recommend the Seleucids. I wouldn't really recommend you play as the Seleucids mainly because of their early diplomatic situation. Okay, so you start off with a lot of satrapies, okay, which are basically like client states that pay money to you and provide military assistance for you every turn. However, as you can see, most of your satrapies, they start off not really liking you much, and the majority of them, they're going to rebel. Okay? And a lot of you are going to probably be looking like, okay, then why are you choosing the Seleucids as the number 1 faction instead of Egypt? Well, here's the thing. So here are the factions that are probably going to rebel. So Parthava is a satrapy, they're going to rebel against you. Sagarthia, Aria is going to rebel against you. And sometimes, however, when they rebel against you, it means you're at war with them. But there are a couple of factions that actually stay as your satrapies. The Sards, they actually remain loyal to you, and they can defend your borders for a certain amount of time against like the Galatians and I don't know, these hostile Anatolian factions here. And Media to your east will easily be able to defend you against any of these eastern satrapies that rebel. And sometimes, if you're lucky, I've actually been lucky before when I've played as the Seleucids. Persia and Dragiana actually remain my satrapy. If you're lucky, then those two will also remain your satrapy. So the Seleucids are actually a really good faction, even though they have a kind of bitter diplomatic situation at the beginning, and oh, but their satrapies are able to help them in their wars. And if I were if I were you, when you're playing as Seleucids, you should go after Egypt and wipe them off the map as quickly as possible. And then after that, the Seleucid campaign, it's one of the, it's easy pretty much. And the Seleucids, they have the best unit roster in the game, in my opinion, other than Rome. I think, in my opinion, that they have the second best unit roster because, you know, Rome, you can't beat, well, Roman units pretty much like outlaw. They can defeat every other unit, but in terms of other than Rome factions, we have the Seleucids are in my opinion, the best. They have the best unit roster in the entire game, other than Rome. They can have the best. They can field armored elephants, which are even better than normal elephants. You can get Hellenic cataphracts, which are really good shock cavalry. You can get shield bearers, which are good hoplites, and silver shield pikes, which are the best pikemen in the game. Silver shield swords, which are also really good swords, and you basically their roster is pretty much very similar to the other successor kingdoms, except that they can field a lot more elephants, and they can also recruit mercenary Syrian archers as well, which are actually one of the best archer units in the game. And however, if you're playing as the Seleucids as a beginner, you haven't had experience in Rome 2, I'd recommend you not play it on like legendary because of the initial diplomatic situation. But the Seleucids are one of the most rewarding factions to play as, other than, you know, I mean, well, they are the most rewarding faction to play as in the game. And that's going to be my top 5 list of Total War Rome 2 factions other than Rome itself. And I'll just see you guys all next time and I am also making a video called the top 5 most underrated factions in the game. So be sure to check that out soon as well.